première question, on va enregistrer la journée pour ceux qui ne peuvent pas être là, donc et ceux qui vont partir et qui regrettent déjà de ne pas pouvoir tout entendre, sachant qu'on va le mettre sur la chaîne YouTube de Locus Ludi, qu'on va l'annoncer maintenant sur le blog, mais après it's not reference, so nobody can find it except you because you really want to listen to it again. And just tell me if it annoys you, because if it's a problem for you, it's not a problem for us. Either we can turn the camera and so you are not seen and we just heard, and also you say that, for instance, one must pay attention, not showing the slides or whatever. So do say if you have something. But it has shown that it's very useful to do it because it's a way of recalling what we have said, and for the publication, because I hope we will publish, it can be very useful. I don't like how it is shown here. Oui, Philippe? C'est normal? C'est normal? Ah oui, il faut faire quelque chose. Hein? Il faut faire quelque chose. Ah, c'est ça. D'accord, on est sauvés. On est sauvés. Merci. Ouais, c'est bon. Ouais, c'est bon. C'est bon. Ok. On peut peut-être régler la netteté. Tu sais faire ça? On va essayer. Non, je crois que c'est bon. On peut éteindre. Oui, on peut éteindre. So, welcome again. Est-ce que vous avez welcome again. And I will have a few words of introduction because some of you, those who are invited, nos hôtes, bienvenue, don't know really about this project. So a few words to say what this project is about. So the project is entitled The Cultural Fabric of Playing Games in Classical Antiquity. And we are all here to discuss one side of it, which is and in fact, we all share this discovery that people play in sanctuaries. But for what reason? What did they do? And what are the traces of this? A few key words also about how this project was born. It is born out of an exhibition that started in 2013-14, and it went on until today because it will open in June 2019. So maybe we can go in another country to present it in a large and renewed version about the culture of play. And preparing this exhibition made us realize all that was to be done on the topic. That in fact we were also repeating what had been said for many years and just producing little bits. So we were, for instance, in Cholet, a very nice place, and we always aimed at having interactions with the audience, making movies with children in order to understand the movements they made when they played marbles, having open day sessions, anecdotical, and it is not at all. And in fact, the first and basic book still used, because that's the only one which is the synthesis, is Les Jeux des Anciens, Bec de Fouquier, Paris, in 1869. Excellent. You can find it online as a PDF, and we are working with Ulrich and Michel Manson on its republication with today's commentaries, looking for the pictures he had illustrated, and so on. Otherwise, for the reflection, well, we have the standard books, excellent ones, of course, Homo Ludens, Huizinga, Caillois, Les Jeux et les Hommes, but none of them explored antiquity. So the concepts are useful, or Brian Sutton Smith. The person I often refer to, because she's the one who was, for me, the most useful, is Roberta Maillon, Why We Play, where she explains the dynamic, and it has also to do with religion, and that's why it is important for us today. I think we also refer to Roberta Maillon. Just so that you understand where you fit. You fit in the second slot. We started in 2017 with text, collecting an anthology with Marco Vespa, all traces, all written traces, also epigraphic traces of games. With Salvatore Constanza, we worked on Pollux and children's games, but not only children's games. And these two outputs will appear, I hope, this year for Salvatore, maybe next year for Marco, and also online available. And in between, between, so we also think about the connection between paideia, so game and education. And we will meet this also with with Lebanon, where we see the two together, game and game, play, pleasure and education. Now we have a second part that started with Thomas Dagneau, who is a doctorand here, collecting material, and with Ulrich, of course, collecting the material traces. So material traces in Roman towns, east and west. It's also board games carved on the floor, and we have already benchmarks realized by Ulrich Schindler in Ephesus, collecting more than 300 board games on the floor, but we must be now contextualized more largely, and published as well. So this will be the output of Ulrich and of Thomas. And also games in liminal places, and that's why Vicky also will tell us about the sanctuary of the Calabria, and as well as what is found actually in tombs in the same area. But it's only the start, and Kyriaki Katsarelia, who is here, will also pursue that work soon as a doctorand on the material found in central Greece. We will have also somebody for northern Greece, I hope in October. And iconography, that's the third part of this project, and all is mixed, of course, because we need the text, we need the pictures, and we need the material. It is about the construction of social identity, so children as social actors, and that's the topic of the thesis of Hala Amar, who is working on that, on depiction of children as actors, actors playing, but with whom and where. And of course the gender aspect, and Alexandra Atia, who just arrived, will work on gender in the Italian fast painting. I will not be longer because we need to hear you now, but if we have time we can return to this, and we could even see the little movies that we did and that we want to pursue, of course, as exploration. But for the time being, we will now listen to Vicky's Sabetai. So thank you for being here. And so Vicky will present us the sanctuary of the Calabria, and you will see that it's a much demanded work. And Vicky is the director of the Academy of Athens.
Zit een beetje focus in het?
Come on.
So good morning to everybody. My topic today is toys from the Calabria Sanctuary in Boeotia, playthings and coming of age in a Greek polis. In my talk today, I will be presenting the toys from the Calabria Sanctuary near Thebes in the region of Boeotia in central Greece. These toys date in the classical and later periods and fall in specific categories, some being common also elsewhere in the Greek world, while others much rarer. After I present you the material, I will examine whether the function and the significance of these toys can be defined a little more specifically in the context of this one sanctuary, which is well known for its distinct offerings, some of which were actually tailor-made for it, such as the Kabiric skiphoi. I will be also touching upon patterns of dedication in other Boeotian sanctuaries, but I will leave out for now the finds from the region's extensive necropolis. The Calabria sanctuary lies at around 8 kilometers west of Thebes, and its foundation myth is mentioned by Pausanias, who does not give any details on the cult. He just talks about a certain Athenian Methapos who founded it but does not say when, and opinions on its beginnings or refoundation are split. The bulk of the archaeological material covers the time span from the Archaic to the Roman era. The testimonia give the names of the main deities of the sanctuary as the Kabiroi, and suggest that it was a mystery cult. The visual sources, which date in the late 5th century BC, and so are much earlier than the written testimonia, depict the kabiroi as a pair, namely as a mature symposiast, the kabiros, and his young son, the pais, shown as his symposium assistant. The excavations on the site were conducted by the German Archaeological Institute. They started in 1887 due to the extensive looting reported in the area, and were completed in 1967 with a long interval and 2 world wars in between, which resulted to partial loss of the old field notebooks in Berlin and extensive packing and repacking of the finds in Greece. The publication consists of 6 volumes that treat the architecture, ceramics, terracottas, metal, and small finds. In the 80s appeared major contributions that sought to synthesize aspects related to the evolution of the cult, as well as the organization of the sanctuary's space, such as that by Albert Schachter, who included the Kabirion in his seminal 4-volume book on Boeotian cults. Several recent studies focused on the grotesque imagery decorating a particular vase type that was unearthed in the sanctuary, namely the Kabiric skyphos, which does not occur in any other cult place. Little has been done on the minor objects, among which are toys that are of interest to us today. Objects from the Kabirion that can be defined as toys or effigies of toys with a single or more than one uses are the following: spinning tops, knuckle bones, yo-yos, gaming counters if correctly identified as such, and possibly also bells. Typical for the Kabirion are the spinning tops, which are very rare in sanctuaries in general, and the bells, which occur also elsewhere. Bells cannot be solely defined as toys, as they were put to multiple uses, but in Boeotia at least, they have strong connections with children. Terracotta yo-yos are mainly known from Attic iconography and tombs, and are narrowly dated in the 2nd quarter of the 5th century. Knucklebones enjoy wide diffusion and a variety of uses in many materials throughout antiquity. However, they are not ubiquitous in Boeotia, but occur to specific cult places. Objects defined as gaming counters are a more problematic category because some may have been miniature spin tops. In the examination of this material, it is important to keep in mind that the chronology of the Kabirion's toys is not as precise as that of other objects. In general, they date from the 5th century to the Roman era. It is wise to keep the historical perspective in mind, as it is possible that the association of toys to specific individuals, as well as their pattern of deposition, may change in the course of time. We start from the spinning tops. Widely known in various cultures since antiquity, they were designed to spin rapidly on the ground. When set in motion, the top could remain balanced on its tip due to its rotational inertia. The top, called vemvix or strovilos in Greek, is mentioned in the Iliad and was associated with Hermes. As a game of skill, it was played by adolescents and adults with the use of a whip. Early examples date in the 8th century BC and have a conical form, while Hellenistic and Roman ones resemble the tops of today that are spun using one's fingers. Spit tops are typical for the Cabirium, are not known from elsewhere in Boeotia, and, to my knowledge, are rare in cult places in general. 13 clay examples are recorded, half of which bear figured decoration of children, animals, mostly water birds and a crab, and palmettes, while one example shows a troparion. Only one clay top is preserved complete, the rest being in a more fragmentary state, and a fresh re-examination of this material will need to verify that all can be assigned to this story. The figured examples can be dated in the late 5th or 4th century BC. Besides clay, there exist examples in other materials, such as marble and steatite. Their conical shape recalls also gaming counters. However, their identification as miniature spin tops may seem secure by comparison to the complete clay example. The excavators mentioned the existence of 18 additional bronze objects that could be identified as tops, but remain undecided as to whether these could have been weights or gaming counters. A typology of tops is needed, as there may exist more variation than usually assumed, and more attention needs to be paid in the publication of minor objects, which are not usually given as much attention as other classes of objects. It is important to mention at this point an inscribed stele of the Hellenistic period that lists votives kept in the Cabirium sanctuary and which was found within the temple. It says that Okithoa dedicated astragals, a spin top, and the whip to spin it, and shows the tight association of this type of toy to the Cabirium sanctuary. The excavators interpreted the tops as appropriate offerings to the junior Cabiros, called pies, and mentioned also its possible symbolism in the context of Bacchic mysteries. Their interpretation is based on the assimilation between the Cabiric and the Dionysiac cult, a difficult topic, as well as on late written sources that posit a relationship between these toys and Dionysiac rituals. Although the votive tops have been associated only with the divinity venerated in the Cabirium, we should take into account the association of votives also with their dedicator and ask questions about his or her social status. To do this, we may turn to the evidence of vase painting and terracotta sculpture. In vase painting, the tops suggest specific associations with adolescence. Although single young women playing with them appear in some examples, the vases depicting youths with tops are earlier and present them in a more developed setting, namely interacting with older men in the context of institutionalized pederasty, which characterized Greek male adolescence and was perceived as an aspect of the education of youths in the Greek polis. Attic iconography emblematizes this phase with the use of an imagery that shows mature males interacting with youths. Most common are scenes showing the mature man or erastis touching the genitals of the youth, the eromenos, while offering him the erotic gift of a rooster. The erastis can be a god, as on the crater by the Berlin painter, where Zeus pursues his beloved Ganymede, the equivalent of the mortal eromenos on the mythological level. Ganymede is depicted holding a hoop and a rooster. the image is not realistic because no one can really roll the hoop while holding a cock, but is a pictorial construct using the toy and the animal as characteristic signs of adolescence and attributes of Ganymede cast as a nephew. The youth appears more realistically, namely holding only his hoop, in more developed scenes where the other iconic attributes are held by his peers, as on a peliki by her monarchs, where a second boy holds the cock and the third the spinning top, together with a whip needed to set it in motion. We realize then that the spinning top pertains to the visual vocabulary of adolescence and is a powerful symbol of it. On a still earlier cup by Luris, second quarter of the 5th century BC, the mature man has just spun the top with his whip, and both males are looking at it intensely, the youth possibly extending his arm in a gesture of admiration for his elder's skill. The context of pederasty is implicit in this scene with the word kalos written in the background. Note how also the floral ornaments here intensify the content of the scene. The leaf above the mature man is developed and thick. The one above the youth is still thin. On a Lykithos of the mid-5th century, the role of the mature man is taken by Hermes, who faces a heavily draped mantled youth with the top, while the top is spinning on the ground. Such draped youths with only one tongue protruding from their himation are characteristic in pederastic imagery, whereby they assume the modest, passive stance of an immature person who is in need of guidance at the crossing to maturity. Institutionalized pederasty was the norm also in Boeotia, where it is testified until the 4th century BC, and where related iconography is ubiquitous in imported vase imagery and statuary commissioned by local aristocrats, as is the stele of Narcissus from Akriphia, whose epigram mentions the name of the Eromenos and his Erestis. So in view of the above, I think that the tops of the Cabirion could be associated with the sphere of adolescence and be interpreted as toys or effigies of toys when in non-functional material or impractical size, too small, too big. They were offered by adolescents as votives to the deities protecting their maturation, namely the Kabiroi, and perhaps not only to pies, as the excavators thought. An inscribed bell mentioning both Kabiroi, to be discussed below, shows that in the mind of the votaries was a father and son or elder and youth relationship. If so, the basic aspect of the cult at the Cabirion was not so much or not only a mystery cult, at least in its earlier phases, but also one that was concerned with the maturation of the adolescent citizens of Thebes, which was the city that controlled this sanctuary. Among these, boys were perhaps more prominent. They traversed 8 kilometers to reach a non-urban sanctuary to celebrate their coming of age, as is the case with the Athenian girls who went to the faraway sanctuary of Artemis at Brauron to undergo puberty rituals. Equally important in the Cabirion and related to the spin tops are the yo-yos, which involve motion and a specific hissing sound as the cord is wrapped and unwrapped in a double disc with a central axis. Its ancient name was probably rhombus, but it is uncertain whether it was a form of iings or a spin top, a toy that could acquire also metaphorical values, related to love magic and divine protection. Yo-yos are mostly shown in the hands of boys and occur in child graves in the second quarter of the 5th century BC, while many examples are decorated. The example of the Cabirion is quite remarkable, depicting Perseus lurking before a sleeping Medusa. The image may have encompassed cultural meanings for the boy crossing to manhood, such as the need to learn how to deal with femininity, a force that the ancients deemed dangerous and in need of taming. Medusa, as is well known, petrifies every man gazing at her. The powerful female is here defenseless in her sleep, a condition that often characterizes figures in a state of trance, and she has nothing fearful because her eyes cannot gaze at anyone. As the toy would spin up and down, these two figures would have spun too, becoming something like a dessin animé. This yo-yo is the earliest known toy from this sanctuary, dating in the second quarter of the 5th century, date of production of yo-yos in general. Characteristic of childhood are the knuckle bones that were retrieved in great numbers in the Cabirion. In Boeotia, they occur only in one other sanctuary associated with the cult of the nymphs at Mount Helicon. They are found also in some select graves, but not in all of them. Knuckle bones are bones from the ankle of sheep or goat, whose origin and function is connected to that of dice. They were widely used in various games, but also in divination, as well as talismans when pierced and worn on the body. The testimonia and the visual sources associate them with children and adolescents, and they also served as love gifts in pederastic as well as heterosexual contexts. More than any other toy, they were transcribed in other materials because of their strong symbolic character. The excavators recorded natural, glass, stone, and metal knuckle bones. Important are 3 from sheep that were filled in with lead. They were interpreted as offerings with a magical function, or as items whose weight falsification was meant to guarantee the best throws at the game. 4 astragals were made of green or cobalt blue glass. 48 were small and 1 was very big, and these were made of steatite or soapstone. 2 were made of marble and 1 was of amber. The transcription of astragals in various materials and sizes attests to their votive use due to the symbolism and association of this object with the realm of childhood and adolescence, while their number attests to their importance for the visitors of the Cabirion. Another category that is more difficult to link with the sphere of the toy, but which cannot be excluded either, concerns bells. These may occur in various sanctuaries and could be used in several rituals. Were they toys? Bells are found throughout the Greek world, from the late geometric to medieval times. They occur particularly in sanctuaries, but also in graves and houses. They do not usually appear in bulk, except for Athena's sanctuary in Sparta, in the Samian Hieraion, and the Boeotian Cabirion. Bells are usually made in metal and clay, the latter being particularly popular in Boeotian tombs. They rarely bear decoration and inscriptions, the only exceptions being bells from Sparta and the Cabirion, which specify that they are votive dedications. The inscribed metal example from the Calabria is kept in London, dates to the 4th century BC on the basis of its letter forms, and bears the inscription Pirias to Kabiros and child. The dedicator is here a man, while in the Spartan examples also female names occur. Fine contexts cannot usually help us grasp the bell's specific uses. These range from implements in rituals to accessories with amuletic function worn on the body, as seen on some terracottas of babies who are wearing it around their neck or their wrist. Their votive and symbolic character is more evident in the clay examples, which cannot really produce strong sound and must have been effigies. In her study of Greek votive bells, Alexandra Willing noted that these objects, as is the case also with other offerings, were part of a complex social and religious framework with many potential uses depending on the setting and the time period. The sound of the bell was generally understood as a signal, but it was also often deemed protective for children and women, making the object an apotropaic amulet. As a toy, the bell may be comparable to the rattle and the clapper that Architas invented for children. This use may explain their extensive occurrence in child graves, on occasion together with rattles, which are usually interpreted as noisy playthings, but which had also a function in the upbringing and socialization of babies in various cultural landscapes of sound, as Véronique has argued. The symbolic dimension of bells as implements of rhythmic sound that could please and appease children, as well as avert the evil at the crossroads of maturation, may have been one of the reasons why they reached sanctuaries such as the Calabria and child burials. I have already mentioned that votive offerings were part of a complex social and religious framework. Does the general framework at the Calabria support an interpretation that points more to the dedicant's coming of age rather than a mystery cult? The Calabria's mystery cult fascinated 20th century scholars, some of whom overstressed this aspect in their interpretations of the imagery, and have in a way fabricated a mysterious mystery cult with a hue that is not unrelated, I think, to modern New Age cultic trends. We should further note here the danger of relying on late testimonia when dealing with the early phases of a cult, because what becomes a mystery cult in the Hellenistic and Roman period may have been quite different in the earlier periods. The problem with the Calabria is that the literary corpus is later than the archaeological one, and the latter should not be viewed solely through the filters of the former. The earliest votives at the Calabria are votive metal bulls, while in the 5th century there is a bulk of black glazed cantharoi, terracottas of youths holding animals such as roosters, and Calabria skiphoi depicting grotesque figures in parodies of well-known myths. The cantharos is not only an emblem of Dionysus in Boeotia, but occurs mainly in heroic contexts, carrying connotations of the aristocratic symposium. Terracottas of youths are much more numerous than those of women in the Calabria, while the roosters they hold are a symbol of male adolescence due to the animal's agonistic spirit and bellicose character. So, the cocks are held by the boys because they are their alter ego and a model of bravery on the animal level. The grotesque imagery on the Kabiric skiphoi comprises parodies of heroic myths, figures of fear chasing small people, such as pygmies, and symposia with deformed palmasts. This imagery has been interpreted as a reflection of masked performances of ritual theater, or more recently, as painterly fantasies of a Dionysiac, carnivalesque character. It may well belong to the experience of the initiate who is undergoing transformation and is imbued with a fear that needs to be overcome by laughter, but in particular also to the ephib who crosses into maturity and is in a similar liminal situation. The depiction of childhood bogeymen may be linked to Kabiric cult, but perhaps more specifically to maturation rituals in this sanctuary. Anxiety marked the transitional period of such rituals, and figures of fear would have been apt embodiments of the threat experienced at the intermediary stage. Eventually, and in the course of maturation, children would learn to control their feelings of fear as part of an agoghi, an education that aimed at transforming them into courageous adult citizens. Grotesque and hybrid, frightful figures embodying children's terrors had a significant role in the Greek pedagogy of expressing and overcoming fear. Note that Kabiric iconography occasionally depicts legendary heroes, as Odysseus here, as cowards in a terrified state. By seeing their exemplary heroes caricatured at a moment when they are faced with existential dangers, the viewers could burst into a laughter that could liberate them from the anxieties of their own initiation, a procedure that would mark their change of status. Admitting fear by justifying it, even for heroes, and presenting it in a humorous gloss may have been a pedagogic strategy associated with the cult of the Kabirion and related to votive practice marking the coming of age of Boeotian youths. It is in this light that we may also recontextualize and study the relatively numerous finds of toys in this sanctuary. Tops, knucklebones, yo-yos, and bells could offer an additional aspect of the mise en scène of Greek adolescence, namely the offering of playthings to mark its end in a sanctuary where educative values such as symposia, pederastic agoghi, and heroic ideals were highlighted and occasionally ridiculed to ease the tensions associated with growing up and transforming from child to adult in the frame of the classical Greek polis. Thank you.
Voilà, Marco Vespa, qui est dans l'équipe, va animer la discussion. Je pense que vous avez des questions. Je commence là. Oui, oui, tu peux rester là.
Are there any questions? Thank you very much for making this.
So maybe one first question. Looking for material in the sanctuary and in the tomb, or maybe also commons houses, what kind of connections did you find? You find knucklebones in tombs, knucklebones in sanctuaries. What about the tops? What about the other objects?
The tops in Boeotia are unique in the sanctuary of the Kabiroi. We do not have them at all in the graves. Also, in the more general framework of Greece, the tops occur only in the Kabirion, and recently a colleague of mine excavated and identified some of a different type than in the Kabirion in the Peloponnese. It's a forthcoming study. So the tops are really rare in Greece in general. They do not occur in tombs. The yo-yos occur in tombs in Athens, but not in Boeotia. The bells are ubiquitous everywhere. And what is the other one? I think we covered. Yeah, sure. What we find in graves, and usually the knuckle bones. The knuckle bones do occur in tombs, but rarely. And it seems that in sheer numbers, they are found in the Calabria and in the grotto of the nymphs on Mount Helicon, and that's it. So one has to look at the pattern of dedication and numbers and quantities, quantify this material.
And I would like to have Ulrich say something about what you showed, because when I first saw the plates about the Calabria, there was this caption: are these tops, maybe you could even show it again, are these tops or are these counters? And you think, gosh, there is work to do. You are at this stage. So what do you think? Can you confirm that these are miniature tops and not counters?
I think it's miniature tops, but we must say that we do not really know very well early Greek gaming counters. So this is just a proposal. A small object like this, of course you might be able to move it on a game board, but what do we know about Greek gaming counters of the 6th or 5th century BC? Practically nothing.
Those steatite and marble pieces I think could be identified as tops by comparison to the clay ones.
Of course.
But one should remember that the clay ones, because of their decoration, can be dated in the late 5th and 4th century, while the objects that are made of other material and found in generally in the strata of the Hellenistic and Roman period may be later. It would be nice to know, but we don't know, because the field note, we have the publication of course, the field notebooks are lost. They were kept in Berlin and lost during the World War. And we do not really have a better stratigraphy. It was excavated in the early days. The excavators say that these objects made of steatite, metal, marble, were found in the Hellenistic and Roman strata. That's what we have. We don't have a typology of spin tops. The problem starts there. We don't have a typology. We rely a lot on the decorated clay examples, which are effigies of spin tops, not the real ones probably. We rely also on the imagery of the vase painting, and that's about it. So
I'm very skeptical about the interpretation of upright objects as gaming counters at this period. Simply because we know, for example, from later times, from Hellenistic and from Roman times, that the counters usually are flat discs, and this is due to the simple fact that if you want to play with such a small object on a gaming board, on a board, you need a perfectly flat board to keep it upright. And you cannot play on the ground, or you cannot play on. We have all these game boards in size in the marble floors. These are relatively irregular surfaces, and a small object like this would not stand upright. It would always fall over. And this is why they use these chips-like counters. It's far more practical. We always have a perfect chessboard in mind, with a perfect flat surface as we know them today. But this is, of course, very unlikely for that period.
I want to ask about the bells.
About?
The bells. Not the clay models, but the real bells. I was wondering whether they had also practical role for the parents to hear where the children are. I was thinking of, as a mother, taking my young children to the swimming pool. So I used to buy them the swimming cap, the most colorful, bright ones, so I can see that they're there, they're not sitting. So I was wondering if maybe...
These objects have a practical use, but one should contextualize them in the context of the culture, and so if you start finding them in sanctuaries, if you start finding them imitated in other materials, if you start finding them as amulets, then you should start thinking about many other uses, symbolic uses, metaphorical uses. So yeah, both, I would say.
Are the bells attested anywhere else in the ocean?
Yes, everywhere.
Thebes, but in Thebes also?
They are found in several child burials. Yeah. So yeah, the bells, we find them everywhere. The opposite of the tops.
And in the Calabria, do we have any grotesque figurines? Handmade?
We do.
And there are some of them...
Very few, but we do have them.
Phallic or...
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
The element of the grotesque is very powerful in the Calabria. It's trademark, basically.
Because it reminds me a lot about the Sanctuary of Orphea in Sparta.
Of course.
About the part of the grotesque and the initiation part of the curve.
Of course, yeah. The Orphea is a very good parallel.
But the bells in Sparta are on the Acropolis, not in Orphea. But we don't have any of them, if I remember well, in Orphea. But there are a lot of links. But this part of the
Actually, the Orphea, as you very rightly mentioned, is our only close parallel to the Calabria, and it is a problem. Why? And what are the connections? Is it the Doric farce? Is it what is it? We don't know. We do know that both are very important regional centers of Greece. And the regional centers and regional art has been overlooked for quite a long time because we have been very Athenocentric. But Athens is another place, another culture, maybe an exception also if one looks at all of Greece.
And we have the same kind of debates about the theatrical performances, the link between the grotesque and the theater. Are they linked to any theatrical play, or it's just a grotesque ritual performance?
Except that in the Orphea we do not have the imagery that we have here in the vases. So here we know that the grotesque is for gods, is for heroes, and it is for mortals. So everybody gets caricatured. Everybody gets laughed at.
Yeah.
So it's laughter that you have. In the Orphea, it's only the masks that we have and some of the figurines, right?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Other questions?
I have a question also about, because I know that now you will have a look at the material itself. And one question was about how these tops are preserved. Did you find traces of actual use of the tops? And I could add that I met Michel Monson, who's a great expert of toys in modern period, and for the kind that we call sabot in French. I don't know how you call it in English, because there are different ways of having tops, just with a little toupee, dantoton, or being a sabot with a whip. And for him, to whip a terracotta top doesn't function.
It's impossible.
Breaks. So it is an ersatz. It is a substitute for the real one.
Right. It's an effigy.
Yeah.
So evocative then.
Yes.
So even of more stronger symbolic character because it has become a votive offering. Yes. So. But maybe there were also wooden tops. Who knows?
Yes. Of course.
And they disappeared because they are a perishable material.
Normally this one.
It's at a certain weight.
It's now time of Marianna Castiglione.
Mais c'est vrai, je voulais... C'est mieux comme ça.
Oui.
Boulon.
Oui.
So I'm very delighted to present Marianna Castiglione, who is an alumna of the Scuola Normale in Pisa, and she held her PhD about the necropoli of Porta di Nocera in Pompeii under the office of Paul Zanker, and she is now a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Calabria.
Yes.
And she still works, I think, in Calabria under the direction of Ida Olgiano, and she interests in terracotta and also cultural interactions between communities and local identities.
Yes.
It's up to you.
Thank you. Véronique, sorry. I'd like to see.
Page unique peut-être. Page unique, voilà.
Il y a un diaporama en bas. Présentation. Présentation.
Mais non, on ne voit pas.
Si, tout en bas, diaporama.
Non, on l'a fait déjà, mais il va automatiquement.
Non, mais...
Ah non, c'est bon. C'est bon, c'est bon.
Okay. So, good morning, and I would thank very much Véronique for the invitation, and I'm really very pleased to present in this workshop focused on children's game the terracotta figurines found in the sanctuary of Harayeb, a rural site in southern Lebanon, firstly excavated by Maurice Shehab and Ibrahim Kaukabani. But before starting, I'd like to briefly summarize the topic of my paper. Firstly, I will present the wall project, originally based on the terracotta figurines and then enlarged. Then we will move to the cut plays and to the choroplastic assemblage, examining in depth its peculiarities and underlining the aspects connected to infant activities. Finally, we will analyze the data and outline some conclusions. The terracotta assemblage we are talking about is also in the storerooms of the National Museum of Beirut, where during the Civil War the former director of Directorate General of Antiquities, Maurice Shehab, the archaeologists who excavated in Harayeb, stored and sealed them behind double concrete walls. And the basement remains sealed, and it will be opened only when the building has been secured after the war. In the new project is part of a wider and ongoing research directed by Ida, as we said, from the Italian National Research Council, with whom I have been collaborating since 2009. It has been started in the storerooms of the National Museum of Beirut, firstly regarding mainly the study of objects and iconographies. Then it was enlarged and moved to the site of Harayeb in order to excavate the context where they came from, entering in contact with the local community. After that, a photographic exhibition was planned in Beirut to communicate with a wider audience and reflect in a broader perspective on the post-colonial history of the country. And then, with a two bilateral project between Italian National Research Council and Lebanese National Scientific Research Council, petrographic analysis have been added to this research, now including also the archaeological excavation in a site very close to Harayeb, in order to investigate the broader rural context connected to the sanctuary, trying to reconstruct the ancient economy of southern Lebanon. An archaeological museum on site has been designed for a future realization, and finally with the support of the Honor Trust Foundation, is permitting to enlarge the research to landscape and underwater surveys and to archaeological and geoarchaeological analysis as well. In our project, the terracotta figurines from the Favissa have been analyzed with a few new methodological and interdisciplinary approach to process both quantitative and qualitative data, information that are both very important, as Arthur Müller has pointed out in his recent article, La recherche encyclopédistique de neuf. All the fragments stored in the museum, consisting in circa 16,500 pieces, have been entered in a database and examined in terms of iconographic and stylistic features, as well as technical aspects. Regarding the manufacturing technique, we can see that in late Iron Age and Persian period, and from Persian period I will refer to the chronology and not to the cultural, handmade and single moulds production were widespread, while in the Hellenistic period, double moulds were mostly used, determining a massive production. Another technical aspect is the presence of polychromy, in some cases very well preserved. Traces of various colors are still visible. And finally, we analyzed the fabric types by means of macro and microscopic examination of pastes and petrographic analysis. All the pastes are characterized by the presence of many macrofossils and numerous small rounded rock inclusions, which might suggest that the production was carried out in workshops near the coast or near a river. And it is useful to recall that the site of Harayet is located 3 kilometers north of the river Litani. After this brief overview, let's move to our assemblage and to the archaeological context. The rural shrine of Harayet in the hinterland of Tyre is located in the vicinity of the modern town, 3 kilometers north of the river Litani. And the sanctuary seems to be isolated, apparently in a poor region in the Inli country in southern Lebanon, but all the archaeological information suggests that the cult place was certainly linked and functional to its countryside hinterland and also to some coastal cities. First of all, certainly Tyre. The figurines in particular and the new data coming from the more recent work and the excavation at the site provide a chronological framework for the context from the 17th to the 1st century BC. It was excavated in between 1946 and 1970 by Maurice Shehab and Brahim Kakabani, who didn't adopt a precise stratigraphic method, being more interested in discovering buildings, structures, and archaeological materials. Different kinds of finds were discovered in the paved external courtyard and in the Favissa. Architectonic elements, among which are lintel with urios, small altars, fragments of statues, 2 Egyptianizing statues wearing the shendit, a well-known type in this region, pottery, coins, glass, metal objects, and finally a lot of terracotta figurines. They published the excavation reports and the archaeological finds, paying particular attention to the iconography of the figurines, especially those that were fully preserved. The new excavations at the site provide a more precise chronological periodization, and very recently, Ida Giano also provided and published a great visual reconstruction of the archaeological context. The first occupation after an intense frequentation during the Paleolithic can be traced back to the Iron Age, late Iron Age Persian period, when the area was chosen to be devoted to cult practices. The form and the extent of the structures connected to the first phase are still unknown. In a phase that can perhaps be dated to the beginning of the Hellenistic period, the structures of the late Iron Age Persian period were obliterated by a larger and completely different building, this one you see. A square building with its southern side opening onto a paved courtyard was built, with a rectangular room forming the west-northwest part of the edifice. Finally, a large paved courtyard was built outside the southwestern wall and of the complex and of Avissa in the north. The figurine assemblage here discovered can be chronologically divided into two main imaginary layers. The first one is dated between 8th and 1st of the 4th century, and it consists of a few local types figurines, generally handmade and created from single mounds. They are mostly inspired by the regional iconographic repertoire, well documented also in Palestine and Cyprus. I am referring to women holding their breasts, pregnant women, horsemen, horses and chariot, drum players, etc. And already in this period, sometimes were inspired by Eastern Greek styles. This is the case of Horai dressed with a chiton and wearing a polos, whose cross-shaped body is a peculiar Oriental feature. There are also some figurines representing Egyptian deities, like Harpocrates or Bes, and Egyptianizing local gods seated and wearing an Osiris crown. The second layer, dated to the Hellenistic period, shows a broad variety of iconographies, even if the previous cultural inspiration derived from Egyptian, Greek, and local elements are still present. The Hellenistic terracottas display few deities, about the 5% of the total, and they are clearly recognizable by means of their features and attributes. Also in the Hellenistic layer we can record many Egyptianizing figurines, like the group of Isis and Harpocrates, Baubo, the child god Harpocrates, Bes, and the Memphite dwarf deity Tychos. The few Greek-type deities, as you can see here summarized, are related in particular to feelings and elements of daily life: love, fertility, nature, motherhood and childhood, wine and art. On the contrary, there are a lot of common people representing the peasants and the worshippers, participating in the same atmosphere of feelings and surely involved in different activities related to the life of the sanctuary. We have, for example, a couple of lovers and mothers and child, but also draped men and women, many musicians, and a lot of dancers, certainly related to rituals, ceremonies, and cultural performances. Although the typologies are known from other centers along the Mediterranean, the rate of presence in this shrine is really peculiar. In fact, a very high percentage of the Hellenistic assemblage, more than 50%, presents images of women and children, both involved in many activities that we can consider linked to rural daily life and the religious performances. The process involves quantitative data based only on figurines surely belonging to these categories, shows that women are represented at least by 3,600 examples and children by 4,800 figurines. Besides the social representation of well-dressed, draped women, often completely wrapped in a mantle and with a fan, like some figurines from Beozza, for example, we have also, as seen before, women playing an instrument or dancing, and females holding baskets, jugs, or hydriae, recalling the similar male representations of amphoras and jug mirror. At this point, we have to notice that female holding hydriae are also known through other cult places all over the Mediterranean, where they were connected to religious practices linked firstly to a more general female and Kurotrophos cult, and then to Adometria cult. Their link with human and natural fertility seems to be clear with the references to the ritual bathing of brides, but they could also reflect the use of water as a part of cult rituals, purifications, or more simply, the daily life activities of the local women and their status of young girls or citizens' wives. Thus, we can argue that all these images surely speak about the religious activities and the offerings in the sanctuary, but also they refer to the habits and the real life of people living in the coastal cities and in the countryside of southern Hellenistic Phoenicia. Children are also involved in different activities, including rituals and offerings, where sometimes they were the main protagonists. Even if their voices are rarely audible in ancient sources, in Karayev we have the opportunity to interpret the iconographies as historical record to reconstruct their habits. In fact, here there is a big variety of images, including figurines wearing a stole, here, that is a typical garment for cult attendants, or children with fruits in their clothes, especially poems, which could have a metaphoric meaning related to feelings, mutual relationship, and love affairs, as Véronique has pointed out. In the same semantic system, we can also consider the figurines of little males and females imitating adults in order to participate in the life of the sanctuary. They dance and play one of the many instruments attested: syrinx, trigon, tambourine, guitar, lyre, and maybe also harp. In the assemblage, children offering animals are also documented. There are, for example, some criophoroi and many figurines standing with birds, sometimes playing with them. I will concentrate only on images with birds because they are much more represented and because, above all, they have a correspondence and figurines clearly depicting playing activities. Among them, we have male children wearing a short tunic and bringing a goose on the left, naked children with only a mantle holding and playing with a duck on the top, for example, or little girls with a belted sleeveless kitten playing and maybe offering a dove. These images are also known from other archaeological contexts along the Mediterranean, as exemplified by some cases in the slide, Crimea, Myrina, and Thebes, for example. And I think it is important to remind 2 points useful for our subject. First, in ancient times, children were often represented with playing with small animals on different iconographic and archaeological media, on pottery or on funerary stelae, for example. Second, in ancient sanctuaries, birds were usually the most attested animals among different species, becoming a sort of privileged markers of youth, also because of their connection to the fertility rituals. In this panorama, the very peculiar character of Karayev shrine is surely the great number of figurines representing children not only offering and playing with animals and birds, but also just playing with them. This is not a very widespread aspect, and as far as I know, only 2 other very similar assemblages have been found. In the class sanctuary of Bostan Sheikh, 3 kilometers far from Sidon, and in the necropolises of Myrina on Lemnos Island. Looking at the figurines playing with the pet birds, we preliminary, I have to remark that this kind of animal was children's favorite pet, both for males and females. A very famous image is the much copied group of a naked, chubby baby boy rocking playfully with a goose almost his own size, recalling the Boethos statue dated at the 3rd century BC. Although we cannot claim the sculpture to be a portrait likeness of an individual specific child, it does nevertheless express a significant degree of feelings for the childhood condition, and in this, it constitutes the visual representation of the cute childish behavior and physical aptitudes, also known from the Hellenistic literature like the Theophilus idyls. Many figurines represent boys standing with a short tunic or naked with a mantle, like you in the slide, feeding and or teasing pigeons, ducks or doves with a bunch of grapes. That was a really very popular motif in all the Central Eastern Mediterranean. This iconography was created in Beotia in the early 15th century BC, and then it was widespread in sanctuaries dedicated to female deities, in the tombs of Myrina, and in some domestic contexts at Priene and Delos. Children sitting or standing in the same attitude of feeding and or teasing ducks and cocks are also documented. And the association between child and cock, known on the funerary stele, reminds the first haircut at the age of 4, when children dedicated a strand of hair with a cock and some sweets in the sanctuary, as well as the connection with the healing Asclepius cult. Moreover, we have many figurines representing children protecting a bunch of grapes from a probable duck. This image is an iconography mostly widespread in Asia Minor and recalls a similar famous figurine from Myrina, where the bird is a rooster. This action could be considered like a sort of fight, reminding the well-known terracotta sculptures with a more explicit cock-child fights, which provided sport for youth down the ages. In fact, it is logical that the boy embodiment of innocence should be shown usually in combat with the cock, which was in ancient times preeminently the bird of strife. For a complete interpretation of this scene, maybe a sort of liminal phase of the childhood, it is also useful to consider some recent conclusions addressed by Negin Mathieu. She reflected on the contrast between men and animals, respectively evoked by the bunch of grapes and the bird. In her reconstruction, this kind of play was the visual conceptualization of a social training to become a young boy. The child had to abandon his childish and wild nature in order to adopt the behavior of a young citizen. Before leaving the childhood, we cannot remind the pet par excellence, the dog, and the many figurines representing children with their Maltese dog, generally jumping and balancing itself on its hind legs. With a tail curling over its back, it was ever the companion of children among Hellenistic periods. We have many terracotta examples from other archaeological sites, and it was also a common motif on gravestones. Moreover, in Karayev, we have figurines representing a sitting naked child on the top here, holding a duck and stroking a Maltese dog with his left hand. As I said before, the huge amount of children images from Karayev can be compared with all the materials found in the sanctuary of Bosan and Sheikh near Sidon, famous for their religious practices connected to children prophylaxis and healing. Here, many terracotta figurines from children, Apocryphs, Bess, Roosters, Heracles, and Dionysus were discovered, as well as statues representing children playing with birds, turtles' balls, and astragali. The proximity between the two cult places is also clear thanks to other same archaeological finds. Many astragali and glass counters were discovered, used for children's games and entertainment. So it is clear that in these sanctuaries, lived by peasants and visitors as public spaces, not only as religious places, during the daily and cultic routine, many children were involved in rituals, but they could also benefit of a sort of supervision, playing and doing other things linked to their growth and education. In fact, those who remained children forever, like Eros or Adonis, were considered dangerous and subversive, while mortal children were expected to grow into adult capacities and roles. In so doing, however, they will lose something as well: playfulness or time spent only in games, for example, addressing to other educational activities. And it is in this connection that we have to consider the few figurines of children with strigil and alabastra, known also from the necropolis of Myrina, and revealing body training and sport activities. Always in an older phase of age, we have to consider the boys standing, dressed only with a mantle, while training their Maltese dog with a balls. It is important to underline that we cannot ascertain that all the figurines with a similar attitude present the little pet, sometimes because they are very fragmentary. And for this reason, and also for the different position of the right hand, this is different from this hand, even if the boy is not completely naked, it could be argued that some of these images represented a scene of body training. We know, in fact, that in ancient worlds, boys were involved in a great variety of ball games, as shown by the terracotta figurines from Corinth, for example, or by an earlier pig-head rhythm from Beirut, with a scent of pasboulet combined with other pairs of athletic boys of the palestra. Pertaining at the same older age are the boys standing, wearing only a mantle and holding in the right hand a ball. A similar figurine is also attested in the necropolis of Myrina. We can interpret this iconography with the help of one epigram, part of the Greek anthology and written by Leonidas from Taras in the first half of the 3rd century BC. The boy Philocles, in becoming adult, offered to Hermes the toys of his boyhood: his castanets, the astragali, his spinning top, and the ball. In our conclusion, the last stage of our analysis concerns another phase of education and socialization, well attested in our rural sanctuary: the schooling for boys and girls. We know that from the age of 7 to 12, Greek boys spent at least a part of the day in the company of their age mates, going to school to learn to write, first with a stylus and wax tablet, later with ink and papyrus scroll. They also learned by heart epic poetry, and training in music was considered important for a well-educated gentleman. In Karayev, we can easily follow many of these moments of education and schooling, and seems also possible to recognize a substantial difference between the serious young boys with a tablet set upon their knees, draped in a voluminous emacium leaving the upper part of the chest bare or wearing a tunic, and the little older boys standing and holding the tablet sets or the papyrus scroll in this last one. Male pupils seated figurines are widespread along the Mediterranean. On the contrary, the standing one, as far as I know, are known only from female examples found in Alexandria. And in Caraïbes, like in Alexandria, Beotia, Eritrea, and Beotia and Myrina, there are also some images of female pupils wearing a tunic or a belted sleeveless chiton, carefully writing or reading on a tablet set upon their knees. We know that normally females, if they learn to read and write, did so within the confines of the oikos. But the rural context of Caraïbes seems to suggest that in the Hellenistic southern Phoenicia, girls profited by a school education like their male age mates. Well, after all this data, it is really time to sum up and to address some conclusions. Considering all the figurines, some scholars try to define the god worshipped in this rural sanctuary. Maria Grazia Lancellotti criticized the definition of mystère ésotérique attributed by Maurice Shehab and Ibrahim Kaukabani to the Caraïbe cults, thinking that the shrine, like that of Ejmun at Bostem Sheikh, was dedicated to healing cults open to all, but in particular to children. Considering that the attention towards childhood was strictly related to healing cults, it is not surprising to find so many figurines of children dedicated. Whatever the god was, it was certainly linked to fertility, healing, motherhood, and childhood, as the many female figurines Kurotropoi, pregnant women, children, and birds attest. Also, the few images of deities headed the same direction. Isis, Bes, Tychus, Harpocrates, Pseudo-Bobo, as well as Heracles, Dionysus, Apollo, Artemis, Hermes, Demeter, Aphrodite, and Eros. Some other figurines and objects complement this panorama. The presence of bunches of grapes, a stragally, a probably figurine of a turtle, and the many mantled dancers, alluding to the movement of a spinning top, remind always Aphrodite, Hermes, and Dionysus. Figurines of birds and cock are connected to Aphrodite and the healing cults of Asclepius, and Silenus, here, that you can see here, recalls the education with the pedagogue. The terracottas representing common people could be surely used as sources for an anthropological approach, as suggested by Arthur Mueller very recently, and to reconstruct rituals and life in the rural sanctuary, as well as the characters of the social and cultural life in this geographical area. In fact, as Mireia Lopez Beltran well pointed out, figurines are not passive objects, but can be seen as material culture in motion. They not only model people or divinities playing or dancing, but also provoke movements and embody practices among the people who observe, touch, or interact with them. In this sense, with a multi-layered analysis of our data, we can obtain more than one key of meaning and understanding. A first key to interpretation considers children with bunches of grapes, balls, and pets as images belonging to the domestic world and to the real daily life in ancient cities and villages. But we have also to consider the meaning of these iconographies in their specific religious context. On the one hand, the local children certainly participated in the rituality of the shrine, for whom we have only indirect evidences. they emulate the adults in offerings, music playing and dancing. That was an important element in religious ceremonies. On the other hand, in the sanctuary, they also benefited of the life in common, in its open spaces as suggested by Plato in the Laws. Here, on the basis of their age, they play together, maybe from 3 to 6 years old. Then they learn to distinguish between their childish nature and the behavior of young boys, going by the rules and becoming good citizens, also by exercising their body and profiting by a multi-layered school education. A summary, yes, I don't know if you see everything, but I put here the kind of actor versus rules, game body training, becoming young, adult imitating and schooling, and then the range of age and the literary sources, the gender attested in the different activities, and the comparisons with other iconographic sources. So, a summary table could be useful to visualize our conclusions, keeping in mind that literary and iconographic sources are peculiar of the Greek words. In the Karaib assemblage, it seems to be possible to distinguish the figurines and their actions on the basis of different stages of ages. The activities regarding only the game, playing with birds and dogs, are attested in the first years of their childhood and involve both male and female. At a certain point, little boys abandon childish objects and attitudes, starting to learn rules, like protecting grapes from the birds, and they train their bodies, maybe frequenting the gymnasia, too, with bulls and dogs, perhaps alluding also to their future activity of hunter. Becoming older means also to change entertainment and offer to the gods the objects related to previous games, like the bull. Females are not included in these activities, but they are represented again in actions related to religious offerings of birds and to some steps of education, music and dance. Around the age of 7, both boys and girls are involved in schooling, a trend attested also elsewhere in Hellenistic period. But, perfectly in line with their social role, females are represented only using stylus and wax tablet, while boys seem to go ahead in their education, allowed to use also papyrus scroll. In conclusion, the terracotta figurines from Harayr, with their proximity to the real world and the allusion to universal themes, are for us an important source to better know and to visualize the daily life in the sanctuary and in the old village at that time, as well as to give voice to women and especially to children who seem to be the main actors in this cult plays. A very last question. Place for the gods? Oh, sorry. Place for the gods, or to secure protection for the children, or place waiting for the gods rituals? Unfortunately, we don't have a unique answer, but we can ascertain, as Véronique has clearly pointed out, that play in Harayr was also used as a metaphorical epurator, as a means to better grow up and acquire different skills. Thus, the aim of the buyers of the figurines was not only to represent a real game or activity, but also to visualize the collective and social images of their lives and recall the reconstructions or rules of age. In this way, terracotta figurines describing games reveal their close connection to the rites of passage linked to the growth and the many changing of status from childhood to adulthood, both for male and female living in this part of Hellenistic Phoenicia. And thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Je viens un peu plus parce que je pense qu'on a vraiment déjà là maintenant l'occasion de faire un bilan. On a vu deux ensembles et c'est ça qui est très précieux parce que justement on veut, in order to progress we must contextualize, and already now we have seen two contexts, very different, very similar too, and I think it's worth reflecting on them while we have them in the head. And so let's open the question. I have a few as well.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. Those little girls who have their wax tables and they are learning to write,
Yeah.
do we have models of this type, figural type, in the earlier periods?
No.
Do we have this type elsewhere in the Mediterranean, or is it specific?
You mean female?
The little girl who has...
Yeah, there are some examples, as I said, in Alexandria, surely in Alexandria, and I think also in Beirut, and Eritrea.
When does the type start? Do we know?
You mean start or where?
I mean, when does the type, the little girl is learning how to write?
Yeah.
When does this start? Because in the classical period we don't have it.
Yeah.
Andy may have an idea, but
I think in in Hellenistic time, surely, because before also we don't have any kind of this kind of representation, and yes, 3rd century BC onwards. Yeah.
I would say the same in Hellenistic, and I think in Hellenistic period, at least in our side of the Mediterranean, we can see two trends. First of all, the rise of literacy in general, generally speaking. More inscriptions, more, and there are also more young women and women being educated in writing. There is a book, I think the title is Women Writing Letters in Egypt, and that's also Hellenistic. So, and I will show another example.
Okay.
Yes, that's true. And there is another reflection, and I tell it now so that you have time to think about it. We have seen context with terracottas, with material. Let's think of what we find on other media, such as vases. And here I think, for instance, of Hannah. And we have seen children playing with dogs, with animals. So maybe you can make a reflection of what did you think about comparing your material. And one striking missing point is no child on the quay, no child learning to write or whatever. So it is interesting because there is the rise of a motive, as you say, in the Hellenistic period. So that's the point. But my question for you two, in your both contexts, there is one missing object for me that I would have expected if it has to do with coming of age and involving girls. It would be the famous dolls that are not dolls. So you have no dolls? You have no dolls?
But I said that I think that in the Calabria, the question is about the rites of passage for boys. There is a evidence to point towards this direction more strongly.
Yes. Though in Brauchon, there are male dolls, as you know. Not really published yet.
Also in Haraya, there are not dolls, and but if you see the percentage, there are many and many male figurines and less female figurines.
the percentage you can?
Yeah, I don't know yet the percentage, but I think that if we say that 10% of children, more than of 60%, 70% are male.
And about comparing, I think of Marco, who has worked a lot on cockfights.
Yeah.
What can you say about what you saw?
There is no cockfights. So,
No.
Okay, so only one. This is very, very important because the cock can change its symbolic value when it is alone or when it is in fight with another cocks.
Yeah.
So this is very important.
We have only children with cocks repairing, as you see in the bunch of grapes, and also figurines of cock, but no cock and fox.
This is very important because the symbolic value of a cockfight is normally negative.
Yeah.
It is the evocation of stasis, so sort of fight inside the family. But when it's alone, so just one cock, this changes completely the image.
Oh, okay.
And I also have a question. Did you find the epigraphical material or inscriptions?
Not really. We have some inscription in Phoenician inscription, but some letters on some figurines, for example, and in some inscription that not really very useful for the cult, and because they are very, very fragmentary.
So Anna, maybe a commentary on children and dogs. I mean, other scenes that those you see, or similar scenes?
Not on children and birds, but maybe on children and birds, because I think it's the first time that I see something really similar to the Asian culture grave for birds.
Wait, another bird.
The bird, you know?
Yes. I don't know what it is.
Because on the tombstone we have a lot of children depicted with animals, so dogs or birds, but they are not playing. And I really think that the similarity between the quest and these statues, or that the fact that they are playing with the animals. This is quite different from the active tombstone that we saw on the...
On active tombstones, you see the child holding the bird, and there is a whole discussion whether it has to do with the soul, the bird meaning the soul of the child, leaving as soon as you open the hand as the child's life.
And there's no connection between children and dogs on tombstone.
But on Koei you have.
Yeah.
And is it similar to?
Yes. I have some days with dogs.
Good.
Sono comparando con Mirina, but you have some direct relationship, productive relationship. One mouth.
No, not yet. I mean, I'm looking for comparison, iconographic comparison, just to make a plan of diffusions, and I saw that in Mirina there are many terracotta figurines of children, and then some typologies similar to us, to our, but it's a work in progress, and so I will search and I will forward about it. Thank you.
What I find very interesting, if I forget, is that you insisted on children imitating adults, and having this dimension of mimicry. If we refer to Roger Caillois' distribution of games, this is something that we must not forget, because we always think of play with something, so a dog, or a bird, or a board game, but in fact most games were played like this. I mean, imitating and socializing also this way, learning how to be an adult. Yes, Silvana?
One of the figurines that you have studied are
representation of older age or everybody?
No, those are little differences between the figurines who play and they are very young child, and then more little older, playing with dog, playing with ball, and of course schooling pupils. Yeah.
I noticed something like a lack of astragals. Because, for example, in Fribourg, there are many statuettes of children holding astragals in their hands or beneath the hand. So, as far as I saw, you have no statuettes with figurines with children with astragals.
No.
Okay.
May I add, Mary? There are at least five astragals which were found. A kit of five. I assume that the medium is too small, and the figurines are not very clear. They are very blurred. So I don't think it's a good medium to show astragals. Because the figurines are like 10 centimeters.
It's not a statue,
Yeah, but
so
sometimes.
that's maybe, but there are astragals.
Yeah, but for example, within the Murina terracotta figurines,
like 20 centimeters in a very clear.
They have just a little bag, for example. They hold sometimes a little bag to show this is the bag for the astragals. So.
So actual metal bones you have?
Yeah. I don't know how many, but because the publication is but yes, we have metal bones.
And similar question, do you have counters?
Yeah.
So there are counters.
I
have counters?
I will show. Just I happen to show.
Yeah. Glass counters. Yeah.
Which mean some sort of clay, and you don't need to have them carved on marble. It can be just drawn on the floor.
And maybe they also had natural one, but maybe Shahab did not collect them. We don't know.
Yeah.
Back in the 70s, 60s?
Yeah.
No, even before
50
that.
also.
50s, it was published in 50s.
Yeah. 50s, yeah. And rural people of the modern town go there and pick up something and
So a glass counter can easily disappear.
Yeah.
Yes, and because we have time to discuss, so I think it's important because we have this comparison, and it's good that we go with that. You have counters because you showed the tops that are probably miniature tops and not counters.
Probably they should be reinterpreted. But in Boeotia, could it be that the pebbles were used as counters and they were not identified, they were not kept? It's very easy to mix up with the pebble. You can really distinguish in the Hellenistic period when there were glass counters. And there are many, but in the earlier periods it is difficult.
But it's interesting that you have some, and Adi also, and as well as Jan, you will see this afternoon, and meaning that there is some play.
It is also possible that in the early periods in Greece, shells were used as counters. So one has to really look at all of the material from the sanctuary to see if there are shells there.
As well as in tombs. And so in the town of Karayem, in the vicinity, because you have stone construction, there is no board game. Those who are hunting board games. No, nothing.
No.
Because there are maybe some in Jan Stern's sanctuary, that's why we know it is possible to think about it. Okay. You have other question? And also almost no adult, we said, almost no adult. And I will return to that about this question of how do children play in sanctuaries? Is it a play adult managed? Or is it a play free?
Yeah.
And I find this interesting, but it's only children that we see, not even a pedagogue or so whatever, grandfather. And we will return to that. It may not be just pictures. Yes. Okay. So we have time for pause
Yeah,
until
it's underneath.
oui, c'est 11h30.